All right, today we're diving into some fascinating territory. The Comanche, those legendary horsemen and warriors.
Oh, absolutely.
The ones who really, sent chills down the spines of anyone who dared to cross them on the southern plains.
Yeah, they had a reputation.
For good reason,
Yeah.
right? But we're going past the legends, we're going deeper.
That's right.
We've got excerpts from their Wikipedia page, and we are going to see what we can dig up on these guys.
Sounds good.
And it's interesting because you think Comanche, you think Lords of the Southern Plains, right?
Right.
But the article mentions they weren't always there.
Yeah, you're hitting on a really interesting point. Their story didn't begin on those windswept plains,
Right.
It actually starts far from there.
Let's go back to the beginning then, because the article mentions they were originally part of the Shoshone people.
That's right, the Shawnee.
Up in the Great Basin.
Completely different terrain.
Different life, different everything. So how do you go from mountains and, foraging and all that to completely dominating these vast, vast plains? It's like trading in your mountain bike for a thoroughbred.
It is a fascinating transition, it really is.
Yeah.
And to understand it, we have to talk about the horse.
Okay.
I mean, it's almost impossible to overstate how this one animal revolutionized Comanche culture.
It's true. I mean, they were the horse people, right?
Exactly.
I mean, the Wikipedia article even mentions they supplied other tribes and settlers with horses.
The two breeders.
But how did they even get started? The Shoshone, it's not like they were running massive horse herds or anything.
That is a very good question, and that's where the story gets really interesting. So picture this. You're in the Great Basin, resources are limited, right?
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly, this incredible animal appears. An animal that represents power, speed.
Freedom.
Freedom, exactly. And scholars believe that this quest for horses might have actually been one of the main drivers behind the Comanche, splitting off from the Shoshone.
Oh, wow, I see.
The Spanish settlements to the south, with their abundance of horses, must have seemed like, well...
A gold mine.
Exactly, a gold mine.
Yeah.
They were determined to get access to these animals.
Makes sense. And it's not even just about finding these wild herds. It's about strategically positioning yourself to have access to them.
Absolutely.
And it worked because they didn't just acquire the horses, they mastered them.
Exactly. I mean, they wrote the book on horseback warfare on the plains.
And the Spanish, they took notice, right?
Oh, yeah.
The article mentions Comancheria.
Comancheria, right?
That's what they called, the Comanche territory, their land.
It's one thing to have rivals, but to have your rivals acknowledge you in that way.
To give your land a name.
A name, yeah.
That speaks volumes.
It says a lot about how seriously the Spanish took the Comanche threat.
And it wasn't just about, them being there. It's those raiding tactics.
Oh, yeah.
The Comanche moon. Talk about sending chills down the spines of, anyone living out there.
Yeah. Can you imagine that? Settlers trying to make a life for themselves, and every full moon, they know the Comanche could be out there.
Hidden in the shadows.
Exactly. Masters of surprise.
Yeah, because you talk about psychological warfare, that's next level.
It really is.
You'd never feel safe.
Right.
Makes you wonder about their society, though. How did a group with that kind of a reputation, how did they organize themselves? It's easy to think about these historical groups as, one thing.
Right.
One tribe, one leader.
A monolithic entity.
Yeah, exactly. But the Wikipedia article on the Comanche, it points out they were never actually a single unified tribe.
That's right. It's a common misconception.
So how do we wrap our heads around that? It's not one tribe, one chief calling all the shots, so what is it?
Think of it like this.
Okay.
You've got your family unit, like your household, right?
Yeah.
Your most basic level of organization.
Okay.
Then you've got these local groups, kind of like small towns, linked by family ties, sharing resources. And then those local groups form these larger divisions, almost like regions within a state,
Okay, so like levels of organization.
Exactly.
But all Comanche.
All Comanche, with that shared identity, but also a lot of autonomy within their specific divisions.
So it's no wonder those Spanish accounts are kind of all over the place with the names and the groups and everything.
Exactly. The naming conventions don't make it easy for us either.
Yeah.
Remember, these names were often given by outsiders.
Right. The Spanish, the Americans.
Exactly.
Oh.
And those names don't always, translate well to the nuances of the Comanche language or their sense of identity.
Makes it hard to study them.
It does.
It really does.
It's like trying to understand a whole culture based on, nicknames their neighbors gave them.
Yeah, but then you see some of those names, those group names, and it's like, okay, I get you.
Right.
Like the Kitseka buffalo eaters.
Tells you something right away about their lifestyle, right?
Exactly right. Or the Quaranen antelope eaters. I can picture it.
Oh, absolutely.
Chasing antelope across the plains.
Makes you want to join them almost, right?
Almost, except then there are the Pinateca, no, the honey eaters.
Okay, now those guys, they were living the good life.
I know. Those are the ones I'm a little jealous of.
All right.
And then you get those living downstream or even don't wear shoes.
I love those names.
It's like each one is a little puzzle piece.
Yes.
And you start to see how diverse they were.
Okay.
The different ways they lived, adapted to the land.
Absolutely.
But it makes you think about them and those Europeans, because it couldn't have been constant warfare, right?
You're right. It was a much more complex relationship than just constant fighting.
So like what, a delicate dance between diplomacy and all that?
Exactly.
And trading?
Oh, absolutely. And the Comanche, they were smart. They knew how to work the situation to their advantage.
So it's more than just them versus us, right?
Way more. I mean, on the one hand, they wanted to protect what was theirs, their territory, their way of life. But on the other hand, trade meant they could get things they couldn't get themselves.
Yeah, the guns, the metal tools.
Even fabrics, you name it.
The good stuff.
It's a classic dilemma, isn't it? How do you let the outside world in? Benefit from it?
Without letting it take over.
Exactly.
Sounds pretty familiar.
Right. A balancing act. Cultures all over the world, all throughout history, have had to face that.
And the stakes were incredibly high.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we often focus on the conflicts, but the Wikipedia article, it mentions a few times where it seems like peace might have actually been possible.
Like that time with Sam Houston, right? Almost brokered a peace treaty.
President of the Republic of Texas.
Imagine that alternate timeline.
It's a fascinating what if.
But it didn't happen, obviously. The Texas legislature was like, nope.
Had other plans.
Yeah. But even without big treaties, they were holding their own for a long time.
They were.
So what happened? What finally led to their decline?
Well, like a lot of Native American tribes, they came up against something they just couldn't fight.
Disease.
Smallpox, measles, just tore through their population.
It's a tragic story, but you see it again and again.
You do.
Disease, not just warfare, completely reshaping history.
Absolutely. And as if disease wasn't enough, they also had the constant pressure of, westward expansion.
Manifest destiny, everyone's got to get out of the way.
Exactly.
The U.S. government wanted them on reservations, and they weren't going to take no for an answer.
And the Comanche were no exception. The article talks about the Treaty of Medicine Lodge in 1867.
Yeah, another one of those promises for a better life.
Promises that were rarely kept.
Yeah, it's a dark period, but the article doesn't shy away from that.
No, it doesn't.
And then, of course, we have to talk about the buffalo.
Central to their way of life.
Can't talk about the Comanche without talking about the buffalo.
You can't.
And the article really drives home how devastating the buffalo slaughter was.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, imagine your world, everything you rely on for survival, just gone, wiped out. Food, clothing, shelter.
It's unimaginable.
It is. It really is.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's hard to even think about facing that kind of loss. Right.
Your whole world, just gone.
Everything you know.
So we're talking about this later period, right? With everything changing, what happened to their culture, I mean, what remained.
That's what makes the Comanche so incredible.
Okay.
Even with all that pressure, they held on to who they were.
Wow.
Their traditions. And the Wikipedia article, it actually gives some really fascinating examples.
Like what?
Well, let's talk about childbirth and how they raised their children.
Okay, so not exactly playpens and daycare, right? We're talking about a different world.
Very different.
Yeah.
And it all goes back to their lifestyle. Think about the cradle board.
Okay.
Might seem like a small thing.
Right.
But it says a lot.
Well, it's practical too, right? You can't be setting up nurseries if you're always on the move.
Exactly. The cradle board, it allowed them to keep moving, keep their babies safe, all at the same time. But the article explains it was more than just practical.
Okay.
It was symbolic too, It represented that connection between, well, everything, all of life, and how important family is. So even something simple like that, it carries so much weight.
It does.
It really does. It's like, you see those classic images of the Comanche, you see the men, the warriors.
Right.
But what about the women? What were their roles? Because it's got to be more than that.
Oh, absolutely. The article talks about this. Women were the heart of it all.
Okay.
Raising the children, preparing the food, taking care of everything.
Which, let's be real, that's a full-time job, especially back then.
Oh, tell me about it. Their work was absolutely essential.
It had to be.
And it wasn't seen as less important than the men's roles. Not at all.
There was a balance.
Balance, respect, definitely. Oh,
Yeah.
and speaking of raising children, the article mentions
What's that?
Pia-mu-pitsi.
That's the Comanche boogeyman, right?
The one and only.
They use that to, teach their kids lessons. It's kind of scary and hilarious at the same time.
Right. But it makes you think about how different cultures use stories. Every society has ways of teaching kids right from wrong. And for the Comanche, those stories, those legends, they weren't just entertainment.
They were how you learn to be Comanche.
Exactly.
Behave, or Pia-mu-pitsi will get you.
Guaranteed to get their attention.
Right. Okay, but all this talk about stories and culture, it makes me think about something else. Food.
Yeah. Yes.
And the Wikipedia article, it's pretty upfront about some of their, let's say, unique culinary practices.
Well, when your main food source is the buffalo, you learn to use every bit of it.
Oh, absolutely. The article talks about how they use the hides for clothes, shelter.
Bones for tools, even the dung as fuel. Can you believe that?
Talk about resourceful, right. But the eating part, this whole thing about the raw liver, the gallbladder.
Yeah, that one.
That's intense.
I know it's a lot. But you got to remember, for the Comanche, it wasn't just about eating. It was about, something more
spiritual.
Exactly. Consuming the liver, especially the gallbladder, it was like absorbing the strength, the spirit of the buffalo.
Ah, okay. Like a ritual,
exactly.
A warrior's meal.
There you go.
Makes a lot more sense now. So we've talked about food, but what about art? I mean, the article mentions it, but it seems like their material culture, it was all about that nomadic lifestyle.
It was. Their crafts, everything had to be useful.
Right. No room for extra baggage.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean it wasn't beautiful, too.
They were known for their resourcefulness.
The article talks about how they could use almost every single part of the buffalo. Tools, weapons, clothing, even ceremonial items.
Incredible, really. Okay, but the article ends on kind of a sad note.
It does, yeah.
Talking about the Comanche language.
It's really heartbreaking.
Those assimilation policies, the boarding schools.
Kids punished for speaking their own language.
It's awful.
It really is, and it took a toll. The article says today, only about 1% of Comanche people speak the language fluently.
It's more than just a loss for the Comanche. It's a loss for all of us.
I agree.
When a language dies, it's like all those stories, all that knowledge, it's just gone.
It's like a light going out.
But even then, there are these bright spots, Like the article mentions those Comanche code talkers.
World War II.
The U.S. military using their language to send messages, and the enemy, they had no idea what was going on.
Talk about ingenuity, right?
Yeah. Even when their culture was under attack, their language was this powerful tool.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to Quanah Parker, doesn't it?
Oh, a fascinating figure.
The article calls him a bridge between that traditional Comanche world
and the world that was forced upon them.
He fought for his people, but he also knew things were changing and they needed to adapt.
He was a rancher, a politician.
Even a leader in the Native American church.
Exactly. He was complicated.
It's like this whole story.
It makes you think.
It does. So as we wrap up this deep dive on the Comanche, I'm amazed by their strength.
Their resilience.
Yeah. It's sad, too, thinking about everything that's been lost, but maybe by learning their story, by keeping their memory alive,
It's a way of honoring them.
Exactly. And to everyone listening, don't let this be the end of it, okay? The Wikipedia article, it's a starting point.
So much more out there.
Go explore, dive deeper into the world of the Comanche. You won't regret it. All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going deep on Joan of Arc.
Joan of Arc, yeah.
You sent over her Wikipedia page, and we're going to unpack it together.
Sound good.
Uncover the coolest parts.
Yeah.
I think you'll be surprised by just how much there is to discover about this French heroine.
For sure.
And why she's still so relevant today, centuries later.
Well, one thing that always gets me is the setting for her story, the 100 Years' War.
Right.
France at the time, imagine, completely divided.
Wow.
England pushing in, taking more and more land, and the rightful king, Charles VII, still hasn't officially taken the throne.
Things were really bad for France, huh?
Dire. Absolutely dire.
Yeah.
And that makes Joan's appearance even more dramatic.
It does. It does.
The Wikipedia excerpt really paints a vivid picture of just how bad things were.
Okay.
The English winning battle after battle, the economy in shambles, political turmoil everywhere.
Right.
It was a recipe for disaster.
No wonder people were kind of looking for a miracle, huh?
They were desperate for something, someone to turn things around.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Joan's beginnings in Domremy all the more extraordinary.
Yeah.
Here she is, just a peasant girl, couldn't read, couldn't write,
Really? Wow.
and yet she was destined for greatness.
It's kind of hard to believe.
It is, but the seeds were planted early on.
Right.
She grew up learning all the traditional women's tasks, spinning, weaving, but maybe even more importantly, she absorbed this deep piety and patriotism from her community,
Oh, okay.
especially from her mother, Isabel.
Right. So that really shaped her, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It laid the foundation for everything she would do later.
But then when she was around 13, things take a pretty wild turn.
That's right.
She starts having these visions, right?
She did.
And we're not talking about any ordinary visions here.
No, not at all.
She claimed to be seeing the Archangel Michael, St. Margaret, and St. Catherine.
Yeah, figures known for their strength, their unwavering faith, their willingness to stand up to powerful enemies.
Oh.
And given the chaos and despair gripping France at the time, it makes sense that these figures would resonate so deeply with her.
Yeah, it does. It does.
And then you have all these prophecies floating around at the time.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Predicting that a virgin maiden, would save France.
Really?
These prophecies were deeply ingrained in the cultural consciousness.
Wow.
Creating this climate of anticipation. It's fascinating how what might seem like delusion today was seen as divine intervention back then.
Right.
But that context is essential to understanding how Joan gained the confidence
Okay.
to approach someone like Robert de Baudricourt, the garrison commander of Vaucouleurs,
She just walked right up to him.
essentially. And keep in mind, she's just a teenager at this point, asking for an escort to Chinon to meet the Dauphin, Charles VII.
That's pretty bold.
Bold is an understatement.
Yeah.
I mean, a peasant girl claiming divine instructions to save France. It sounds far-fetched, even for the time. Naturally, de Baudricourt dismissed her at first.
I bet he did.
But Joan, she was persistent. She was determined. Even after her village, Domremy, got attacked by Burgundian forces who were allied with the English.
Oh, wow.
She went back to Vaucouleurs. She wasn't giving up.
So she must have really believed in her mission, huh?
Absolutely. She was unwavering in her conviction.
Yeah.
And something about her spirit, must have convinced the people around her.
Okay.
Because eventually, she secured her escort to Chinon.
Wow.
And she set off on this journey, get this, dressed in men's clothing.
She did. Why?
Now, that's a whole other story. A lot of debate about the reasons behind that.
Okay.
But it definitely speaks to her boldness, her willingness to defy convention.
That's for sure.
And then, picture this. She finally reaches Chinon at 17 years old.
17.
Stands face-to-face with Charles VII.
Wow, what a moment.
Historical accounts suggest she had this undeniable charisma, this unwavering conviction.
I bet.
And her message was clear. Charles, you are the rightful king.
So she was addressing his biggest insecurity, huh?
Exactly. His claim to the throne was shaky. There were doubts. And Joan, by assuring him of his legitimacy, she was playing a very clever political game.
Very smart.
But Charles, he was a cautious man. He needed more than just words.
Of course. So what did he do?
He put Joan through a series of tests.
Tests? Like what?
First, he sent her to Poitiers to be examined by theologians,
Oh, wow.
to kind of figure out where her inspiration was coming from.
Right.
And while they couldn't pinpoint the exact source,
Okay.
they were really struck by her piety, her sincerity. You can almost imagine them thinking, well, if she can inspire our troops, why not give her a chance?
It was a gamble, though.
A big one,
Yeah.
but potentially with huge rewards.
Right.
Then there were other tests to confirm her virginity.
Never virginity.
Yeah, it was a big deal back then.
Okay.
They needed to establish that she was the maid prophesied to save France.
Right, because of the prophecy.
Exactly.
Wow, that's interesting.
These tests, they added to Joan's mystique, but they also show us how important religious belief was at that time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Religion and politics were totally intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
And once Joan passed all these tests, well, she didn't waste any time.
What'd she do?
Got her armor and banner prepared, even obtained a special sword from the church of Sainte Catherine de Fierbois.
She was ready for war.
She was ready.
Wow.
And before heading to Orleans, she sends this letter to the Duke of Bedford, the English commander.
What did it say?
She boldly proclaims that she's sent by God to drive him out of France.
Oh my gosh, she wasn't messing around.
Nope, not at all.
Talk about a power move.
Right? Psychological warfare at its finest.
Oh, no.
By the time she arrives in Orleans in April 1429,
Okay.
the English were already on edge,
I bet.
hearing about this young woman claiming divine authority.
It's pretty intimidating.
It was, and the siege of Orleans was a pivotal moment in the war. The French were completely demoralized, the city was about to fall,
Wow.
and then Joan arrives with her banner, with her unwavering faith.
It's like something out of a movie.
It is a complete turning point.
So what does she do? More than just, showing up.
Well, the Wikipedia article does a great job of highlighting how Joan's impact went beyond just her presence.
Okay.
She was fearless in battle, always at the front, urging the troops forward.
Wow.
It was like she embodied this belief that God was on their side.
Yeah, I can see that.
And within 9 days, the English lifted the siege.
9 days. That's incredible after months of struggle.
I know, right?
Joan leads them to victory in less than a week.
It's amazing.
No wonder she gained such a devoted following.
Oh yeah, this victory solidified her image as a divine messenger.
Mm-hmm.
Prominent religious figures, people like Archbishop Chaloux and theologian Jean Gerson, started writing about her, supporting her mission.
Wow.
To the French, she was a miracle worker. The English, of course, had a different perspective, claiming she was in league with the devil.
Of course they did.
But regardless of how you interpret it, Joan had become a force to be reckoned with.
She was a game changer, that's for sure.
Exactly.
And she didn't just stop at Orleans, right? She pushed for something even bolder.
She did.
A march towards Rheims to crown Charles VII.
That's right.
What a move.
It was a strategic masterstroke.
How so?
Well, remember, Rheims was under Burgundian control at this point.
Oh.
Crowning Charles there would legitimize his claim, really cement his authority in the eyes of the people.
It was a power move.
Absolutely.
So off they went on the Loire campaign.
A series of battles aimed at securing the path to Rheims.
Got it.
Their first target was Jargeau.
Okay.
Joan, once again, led the French to victory.
Amazing.
She even sustained an injury during this battle.
Really?
Yeah, a stone hit her helmet as she was scaling a siege ladder.
Oh, wow.
But she kept going.
Nothing could stop her.
It seemed that way. Then they moved on to Meaux-sur-Loire, secured the bridge, forced the English to retreat.
Wow. They were on a roll.
They were. And that set the stage for the Battle of Patay, a decisive victory for the French.
What happened there?
The English, led by Sir John Fastolf, were trying to relieve Beaugency, but they walked right into a trap set by the Armagnacs, Charles's faction.
Oh, no.
They'd planned this ambush, but word got out. The Armagnacs had to scramble, scattered their archers.
Okay.
But in the chaos, they ended up routing the entire English army.
Really?
Fastolf barely escaped.
That's a huge win.
It was a turning point in the war, no doubt.
Yeah, I'd say so.
The English were reeling, and Joan's strategic influence, even though she wasn't officially in command,
Right.
was undeniable.
It's hard to argue with results like that.
Exactly.
So what next?
Some of Charles's advisors wanted to press their advantage, invade Normandy.
Okay.
But Joan, she remained focused on her goal, the coronation at Reims.
And Charles agreed.
He did, clearly impressed by her string of victories.
Rightfully so.
Their march to Reims was practically a victory parade.
Oh, wow.
Hounds surrendered one after another, pledging allegiance to Charles.
Amazing how quickly things changed.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Auxerre fell after just 3 days of negotiations.
Wow.
And even Troyes, which had been putting up a strong defense, eventually yielded to Joan's unwavering determination.
It's like she was unstoppable.
It seemed that way.
What a moment it must have been when they finally entered Reims.
I can only imagine.
July 16th, 1429.
And the next day, Charles II was officially crowned King of France, with Joan standing right beside him.
It was the culmination of everything she had fought for.
It was the pinnacle of her influence.
She had achieved the impossible.
In just a year, she had turned the tide of war, restored the rightful king, and cemented her place in history.
It's an incredible story.
It is.
But as we know, it doesn't end there.
No, sadly it doesn't.
Things take a turn for the worse after the coronation.
They do.
Joan's role starts to diminish, right?
That's right.
The court doesn't need her warrior spirit anymore.
Well, a truce was declared with the Duke of Burgundy.
Okay.
Negotiations began. The war seemed to be winding down.
So Joan's purpose was kind of unclear.
Exactly. The court no longer needed her in the same way.
And maybe her strong personality, so effective on the battlefield, became a liability in the political arena.
It's possible she wasn't exactly known for her patience or willingness to compromise.
Right.
And then came the Siege of Paris in September 1429, a major setback for Joan and the French.
Tell me about that.
Well, she was even wounded during that battle. A crossbow bolt hit her leg.
Oh, wow.
She wanted to keep fighting, but Charles ultimately called off the attack.
He retreated.
He did.
So the shine of Joan's invincibility started to fade a little.
It did. Perceptions can change so quickly, especially in the world of politics.
Yeah, that's true.
Some historians argue that the court just didn't need her warrior spirit anymore,
Right.
while others suggest that jealousy and political maneuvering played a role in her diminished position.
It's probably a bit of both, huh?
It's likely a complex mix of factors.
So where do we go from here?
Well, after the failed siege of Paris, things went downhill for Joan rather quickly.
Oh, in what way?
She was sent to attack the territory of this mercenary named Pernod Grissart,
Okay.
but the campaign was unsuccessful.
Oh, no.
They captured Saint-Pierre-le-Moutier, but failed to take La Charité-sur-Loire.
So not a total loss.
True, but they lost their artillery during the retreat.
Ooh, that's gotta hurt.
It did. It seemed the magic had run out.
Yeah, I can imagine that had a big impact on her reputation, going from invincible savior to struggling commander in just a few months.
That's the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah, the whispers must have started, right?
Undoubtedly.
People questioning whether God had abandoned her, whether she was truly who she claimed to be.
It's hard to maintain that level of adulation when things start to go wrong.
That's for sure. So what happened next?
By the end of 1429, Joan was back at court, but her star had definitely faded. Charles ennobled her and her family, which was a huge honor. But the truce with the Burgundians left Joan without a clear purpose.
She was kind of adrift?
She was. And this, unfortunately, leads us to the events that would seal her fate, the Siege of Compiègne.
Okay, let's dive into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Compiègne, it was a strategic town, really important, a real thorn in the side of the Duke of Burgundy.
How so?
He'd been given control of it in a treaty, but the Armagnacs, they recaptured it.
Oh, right. And remember, there was that truce between Charles and the Burgundians?
Exactly, so things were tense.
So Joan heading to Compiègne to try and break the siege, that was kind of like a rogue move, wasn't it?
It was. She went without Charles's approval.
Wow, really?
It's a point of debate among historians, you know?
Yeah.
Some see it as a desperate act,
Okay.
maybe even reckless.
Driven by what?
Her fading influence, maybe a desire to prove herself.
Mm-hmm.
Others argue she couldn't have done it without some support from the court.
Like what?
Financial backing, maybe the promise of reinforcements.
Interesting.
The truth, it's probably somewhere in between.
Makes sense.
Joan, she was known to act decisively,
Yeah.
driven by her convictions.
Right.
So she gathers her volunteers,
Okay.
sets off for Compiègne in March 1430,
Right.
and she picks up reinforcements along the way, other commanders eager to join her.
The legend of Joan of Arc.
Exactly. And she even achieves a victory at Lagny-sur-Marne.
Another victory, wow.
Captures the Anglo-Burgundian commander Franco-Terras.
Okay, now wait. Wasn't it common practice to ransom captured commanders?
It was, yeah.
Usually,
So what happened?
Joan, she allowed the townspeople to execute Duras
Execute him.
after a trial.
Wow, that's harsh.
It was a controversial decision, for sure.
Yeah, I can see that.
Probably fueled animosity among the Burgundians and the English.
Right.
So she was making bold choices.
Maybe out of frustration.
Perhaps frustrated with the politics, her diminishing role.
And finally, she reaches Compiègne in May 1430, ready to break the siege.
But things don't go as planned.
No, they don't.
What happened?
The countryside around Compiègne couldn't support a large force.
Okay.
Joan had to send most of the army away.
Oh, no.
She entered the town with only about 400 soldiers.
400 against a whole siege.
Not great odds.
And this is where she's captured.
It is, sadly.
Tell me about it.
May 23rd, Joan leads a sortie from the town,
Okay.
attacking the Burgundian camp at Margny.
All right.
The attack fails,
Oh.
and Joan ends up being captured.
By who?
A pro-Burgundian nobleman, Lionel de Vendôme.
Wow, the Maid of Orleans, taken prisoner.
It's a shocking turn of events.
It is. What happened next?
The English, they were thrilled.
Of course.
Saw her capture as a major victory.
Right.
They negotiated with the Burgundians
To do what?
to get their hands on Joan.
Okay.
They paid a hefty ransom,
How much?
10,000 livres tournois.
10,000.
That's an enormous sum.
It really shows how much they feared her.
They did, even as a prisoner.
Yeah.
They recognized her as a symbol of French resistance, a threat to their control.
So what do they do with her?
Transferred her to Rouen, their stronghold in France.
Okay.
And that's where she faces the infamous trial that would seal her fate.
The trial of Joan of Arc, one of the most controversial in history.
It is?
What were the charges against her?
Well, the trial began in January 1431.
Okay.
And it was, to put it mildly, a politically motivated spectacle.
Designed to do what?
Discredit Joan, and by association, undermine Charles VII's legitimacy.
That makes sense.
She faced over 70 charges.
70.
Most of them stemming from her claims of divine inspiration and her wearing of men's clothing.
Her clothing?
Yeah, seems strange, right?
It does, for a heresy trial.
It was a big deal back then, though.
Really?
Remember, the English were behind this trial.
Right.
They needed to paint her as a heretic, to delegitimize Charles's coronation.
Okay.
And for them, her cross-dressing was a clear violation of God's order.
A symbol of a supposed heresy.
Exactly.
So it wasn't really about religious doctrine.
Not really. It was about politics.
They were using the trial to manipulate the situation.
100%.
This whole trial was rigged against her, wasn't it?
From the start.
So?
Bishop Cauchon of Beauvais, a staunch supporter of the English, he presided over the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
Joan was denied legal counsel, subjected to constant questioning, pressured to recant her visions.
That sounds awful.
It was. And there's evidence that some of the records were falsified
Really?
to make the charges against her seem stronger.
That's heartbreaking.
It is, but Joan, she wasn't just a passive victim, you know.
What do you mean?
She defended herself,
She did.
showed remarkable intelligence, composure, and she was quick-witted.
Give me an example.
One famous instance, they asked her if she knew she was in God's grace.
Okay.
A classic theological trap.
How so?
No one can truly know that for sure.
Right.
But Joan, she's smart. She replies, "If I am not, may God put me there. And if I am, may God so keep me."
Wow, that's clever.
It is. She avoided confessing guilt or heresy while still affirming her faith.
Very smart.
Even her captors, they were impressed
Holy.
by her courage, her piety.
But in the end, the outcome was already decided.
It was. Under immense pressure, Joan eventually signed an abjuration.
An abjuration? What's that?
Basically, she renounced her visions, agreed to wear women's clothing.
So she denied everything she believed in.
She did. It must have been devastating.
It's so sad.
And the tragedy doesn't end there.
What do you mean?
As part of the abjuration, she was supposed to be moved to a church prison.
Okay.
But the English kept her in their custody, still chained, guarded by men.
Why would they do that?
It's unclear, but witnesses at her later rehabilitation trial, they testified that she was mistreated.
Mistreated? How?
Possibly even assaulted while in English custody.
Oh.
They also said that men's clothing was left in her cell.
On purpose?
Maybe it forced her to break her abjuration?
So it was a setup.
It's possible. Whether it was deliberate by the English or just a cruel prank by the guards, historians still debate it.
Either way, it's awful.
It is. And when Cauchon found out that Joan had put on men's clothing again,
What happened?
he declared her a relapsed heretic,
Relapse.
meaning she could be executed.
Oh, no.
And that's exactly what happened.
May 30th, 1431, at just 19 years old, Joan of Arc was burned at the stake in Rouen marketplace.
A horrific end to such an extraordinary life.
It's hard to believe Charles VII didn't try to save her.
It is. There's no evidence of any real efforts to get her released.
Maybe he was afraid of the political fallout.
It's possible. Or maybe he feared reigniting the war with Burgundy.
But he owed her so much.
He did. His inaction really tarnished his reputation.
He did commission those investigations into her trial later, right?
He did, leading to her rehabilitation in 1456.
But that seems like too little, too late.
It does. Probably more about political convenience than genuine remorse.
But Joan's story didn't end there, did it?
No, it did.
Her legacy, it continued to evolve,
Over the centuries, she became a symbol with many different facets.
reflecting the values and aspirations of different eras.
Exactly.
Let's explore those different interpretations of Joan's legacy in the next segment of our deep dive. It's amazing how Joan's story has resonated across the centuries.
It really is.
She's become a symbol for so many different causes.
So many movements.
Where do we even begin to unpack her legacy?
Well, I think the most obvious place to start is with Joan as a military hero.
Right. She rallied those demoralized troops,
Led them to victory.
paved the way for Charles VII to be crowned king.
Her role in turning the tide of the Hundred Years' War is undeniable.
And that's why she's so closely associated with French national identity, right?
Exactly.
She's the ultimate defender of the nation.
A symbol of resilience.
Against foreign invaders. It's interesting how different groups have used her image throughout history to kind of evoke those patriotic sentiments.
The Wikipedia excerpt mentions Napoleon invoking her name. The Third Republic establishing a holiday in her honor.
Wow.
And even both sides in World War II trying to claim her legacy.
That's crazy.
It shows just how powerful her symbolism is, how adaptable it is to different agendas and ideologies.
She transcends specific moments in history almost. She becomes this timeless embodiment of French spirit, French resistance.
But she's not just a military figure, is she?
Right.
There's also the religious aspect.
Which is fascinating.
Especially considering she was condemned as a heretic.
Yeah, how does that even work?
It's one of the great paradoxes of her story.
Totally.
But even during her life, her piety and those claims of divine inspiration, they were central to her appeal.
People believed her.
They did.
And then after her death, particularly after her rehabilitation in 1456, she became this icon of faith.
Purity, martyrdom.
For the Catholic Church.
It's a remarkable transformation.
It really is, going from condemned heretic to revered saint.
Talk about historical revisionism.
Yeah. It shows how perceptions can completely change over time.
They do. And then there's the more modern interpretation of Joan as a proto-feminist figure.
That's an interesting one.
It's an important part of her legacy.
That's gained a lot of attention recently.
For good reason.
Think about it. A young woman defying societal norms.
Leading armies.
Communicating directly with God.
It's a powerful image.
It really is, especially for women who see her as a pioneering figure.
A symbol of female empowerment.
She challenged gender roles in a huge way.
She did, wearing men's clothing, riding into battle.
Commanding men who were, in theory, her superiors.
Exactly.
She refused to be limited by what society expected of women.
And that's why she continues to inspire today.
Especially those who see her as a symbol of breaking down barriers.
Defying expectations.
She shows us that even in the most oppressive circumstances, one person can make a difference.
Absolutely.
We've talked about her military achievements, her religious significance, and her role as a proto-feminist icon. But what about the controversy around her cross-dressing?
It's a key part of her story.
It played a central role in her condemnation.
And in her modern interpretations.
Why was it such a big deal?
We have to understand the historical context.
Okay.
In Joan's time, wearing men's clothing, it was a serious offense.
Against societal norms, religious norms.
Both. It was seen as rebellious, deviant.
Challenging the established order.
Exactly.
But Joan insisted on wearing men's clothing.
She did.
Claimed it was a command from God.
Part of her divine mission.
A way to protect her virginity.
And maybe even a way to assert authority in that male-dominated world.
It's fascinating to think about her motivations.
And how people perceived her actions.
Today, a lot of scholars see her cross-dressing as a symbol of defiance.
Absolutely.
Her refusal to conform to those rigid expectations.
It adds another layer of complexity to her legacy.
It really does. Joan of Arc's story is so captivating.
She was a woman ahead of her time.
Someone who challenged the status quo.
And continues to inspire us centuries later.
So what does it all mean?
What can we take away from this deep dive into her life?
Her incredible and ultimately tragic life.
I think it reminds us that even in the darkest times, hope can come from the most unexpected places. She embodies courage, conviction, even against overwhelming odds.
Right.
And maybe, most importantly, she encourages us to question the narratives we're told.
To look deeper.
To grapple with the complexities of history.
And human nature.
Exactly.
Joan of Arc's legacy is a tapestry woven from threads of faith, war, politics, and gender.
It's a story that keeps being told and retold.
With each generation finding new meaning.
New inspiration in her extraordinary life and death.
Joan of Arc, what a figure.
She really is something.
This deep dive has only scratched the surface.
Barely?
There are so many books, films, plays, even operas about her.
From all different perspectives.
Keep exploring.
See what resonates with you.
And uncover even more layers to this incredible woman's story.
She's worth it. All right, ready to dive into something epic.
Epic, yeah, I like it.
Today's subject, the English Channel.
Ooh, good one.
I've been doing some reading, mostly from, its Wikipedia page.
Wikipedia, the rabbit hole of, well, everything.
Exactly. And it's fascinating how much more there is to this than, just ferries and choppy water.
Absolutely. I mean, the channel, it's almost like we take it for granted. It's just there, right? A stretch of water. But when you dig in, it's been this major player for, well, millennia.
Oh, yeah.
Shaping geography, culture, the whole shebang.
Okay, so before we go too deep, can we talk about how it was once a land bridge?
Oh, yeah, the land bridge. I know, right?
Seriously, what happened there?
Wild, isn't it? Picture this. Pleistocene era, ice ages, and there's this ridge connecting Britain to, well, Europe.
Okay.
Then, bam, massive floods, most likely from glaciers melting, and boom, the channel's born.
So instead of hopping on a ferry, I could have just walked over.
Right. Talk about a different commute.
I would love to see a time lapse of that whole thing.
We'd need a pretty serious time machine for that, huh?
Yeah.
But even the name English Channel, that has a whole story.
Is it?
French sources, they call it La Manche.
La Manche.
Yeah, meaning like the sleeve because of its shape.
Oh, that makes sense. Looking at a map, yeah.
Makes sense.
But I'm curious about something. The name English Channel, does that, imply some sort of ownership?
Ooh.
Was there ever, a debate about who gets to claim it, especially with how strategically important it is?
Great question. And it really highlights how geography and politics, they get so tangled up.
Right.
Historically, the English and the French, they've both tried to, well, control the channel.
Oh, yeah.
Because they knew how important it was for trade, for defense, even just for, national pride,
Yeah, you don't just want to be near the English Channel if it could make or break you.
Exactly.
Okay, let's get some basic geography out of the way. Arm of the Atlantic separates England and France, connects to the North Sea via the Strait of Dover. What else should we know?
Well, for starters, the width, it's surprisingly varied. At its widest, you're looking at about 240 kilometers.
Okay.
But at the Strait of Dover, it gets really narrow.
How narrow?
Only 34 kilometers across.
Wow. You'd think a narrow strait would be easier to defend.
Yeah.
But, throughout history, it actually made the English kind of vulnerable to surprise attacks and all that.
Yeah.
Control of that strait, it was critical.
It's not just about the narrowness either. The Strait of Dover, it's also super shallow.
Oh.
Average depth, just 45 meters. And then you've got the infamous Goodwin Sands lurking just below the surface. Makes navigation, well, interesting.
Okay, wait, hold up.
Yeah.
Goodwin Sands? What are those?
Basically, huge sandbanks. Really treacherous for ships. Yeah, over the centuries, countless shipwrecks. They even call them the ship swallower, so.
Yikes. Makes you appreciate modern navigation, huh?
Yeah.
So we got this narrow, shallow strait, and the channel itself acts like a funnel for tides.
Exactly. It's like the channel takes that tidal range less than a meter out at sea.
Yeah.
And then, boom, amplifies it up to over 6 meters in some spots.
Whoa.
Yeah, pretty dramatic.
That must impact coastal communities like crazy, right? They have to adapt to these huge water level changes every day.
Absolutely. Think about their way of life, their buildings, everything's shaped by that.
So it's not just a bit of water, it's like a living, breathing thing.
Exactly. And speaking of which, can't forget the islands.
Oh, right.
The Isle of Wight off the English coast, big tourist spot.
Oh, yeah.
And then there are the Channel Islands. Closer to France, but they're British Crown dependencies.
Oh, the Channel Islands. I've always wondered about those.
Yeah.
How did they end up as, British, even though they're closer to France?
It's a long story, goes back to the Norman conquest. Basically, Channel Islands were part of the Duchy of Normandy, and when William the Conqueror took over England, well, they just stayed under English control.
Interesting.
Over time, they developed their own legal systems, their own cultures, a bit different from Britain and France.
So they're like these little pockets of history.
Exactly, holding on to their own identity in the middle of this, tug of war between England and France.
Makes you wonder what life's like there. But let's get back to the mainland.
Yeah.
Thinking about how the Channel has been this crossroads of cultures forever.
No, absolutely. A route for trade, cultural exchange, but also the first line of defense against invasions.
Right.
And get this, there's evidence of people sailing around the channel like 8,000 years ago. They found a Mesolithic boatyard on the Isle of Wight.
Whoa, wait, a Mesolithic boatyard?
Yeah.
What were they doing out there? Trading, exploring, fishing?
That's what archaeologists are trying to figure out. It kind of throws everything we thought we knew out the window.
It's like rewriting the history books.
Right. Yeah, it pushes the human story of the channel way back. Really cool.
I love that. Okay, so ancient boatyards, check.
Mhm.
Then come the Romans,
Right. Julius Caesar and his legions
crossing the channel,
changing the course of British history big time.
big time. And then, after the Romans, you have the Anglo-Saxons.
Right. The Germanic tribes that totally transformed Britain.
And the channel was this highway for those migrations, for cultural change. It's amazing.
It wasn't just about armies either. It was people, ideas, goods, all flowing back and forth, shaping both sides of the channel.
Right. And we can't forget about the Vikings.
Oh, the Vikings, they loved the channel.
Raids, settlements, the whole bit. You can't talk about the channel's history without mentioning them.
Absolutely. They were such skilled navigators. The channel with its, crazy weather and currents, it was a challenge they totally embraced.
It seems like everyone wanted a piece of the channel. But then there was a point when England and then Britain, they really started to dominate, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Control of the channel became key for them to become, well, a naval superpower.
I bet that didn't go over well with everyone.
Oh, of course not. The rise of British naval power in the 16th and 17th centuries, it was all about controlling the channel. That was their first line of defense. It helped them stop invasions, like the Spanish Armada back in 1588.
The Spanish Armada, that must have been an incredible sight. English fleet battling it out with the Spanish right here in the channel.
But what about the French? Were they just letting this happen?
No way. They were constantly challenging the British. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, figures like Napoleon.
Oh, yeah, Napoleon.
He knew the channel, it was vital for his own plans.
So it was this constant back and forth, England versus France, battling for control. And I'm guessing this rivalry just keeps going right into the 20th century with the World Wars.
Exactly.
Ah.
During both World Wars, the channel became a critical battleground.
Oh, yeah.
In World War I, the British came up with something called the Dover Barrage.
The Dover Barrage. It was this system of mines and nets designed to stop German U-boats getting into the Atlantic.
So warfare evolved to match the channel's unique geography. That's so interesting.
Isn't it?
And World War II, the D-Day landings, right?
Huge moment. The channel became a symbol of liberation.
Thousands of troops crossing it.
Liberating Europe, they had to control the channel, make sure those troops and supplies got through safely.
That must have been an unbelievable logistical challenge.
Nightmare, but it worked.
The channel has seen so much history, right from those ancient boatyards to world-changing battles. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around it all. What stands out to you so far?
What strikes me is this. The channel has been both a connector and a divider. It's helped bring people and cultures together, but it's also fueled conflict and separation. It's like this mini version of human history,
It really makes you wonder what role it'll play in the future as we face all these new challenges and opportunities.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. But I think we should save that thought for later. We've got a lot more to cover about the channel today. Shipping, renewable energy, all that good stuff. So stay with us.
Definitely.
All right, so we've covered a lot of history.
Yeah, lots.
But the English Channel, it's not just some, relic of the past.
Oh, definitely not.
It's still like a super busy place.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Busiest shipping lane in an entire world.
Is it really?
Oh, yeah.
I knew it was busy, but like...
Over 500 ships passing through every single day.
500 ships a day. That's insane.
It's pretty mind-boggling when you think about it.
Especially with how narrow it is in some parts.
Right. You'd think it would be like a traffic jam out there.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
how do they even manage all that? Is it like air traffic control, but for ships?
Yeah, kind of.
I
It's
guess
called a traffic separation scheme.
Traffic separation scheme.
Yeah, the International Maritime Organization, they set it up back in the 70s.
Okay.
Basically, it's like lanes on a highway, but for ships.
Okay.
So you've got vessels going north, they use the French side, those heading south, English side, and there's a separation zone in the middle. Keeps things from getting, well, too close for comfort.
So it's like a giant, carefully choreographed,
Yeah.
Maritime ballet or something.
Right. Hundreds of ships all weaving around each other.
It's pretty impressive when you think about it.
Takes a lot of coordination.
247, monitoring, communication, got to make sure everything moves smoothly.
Absolutely. Safety first.
And of course, we can't forget the ferries.
Oh, yeah, the ferries.
For so many people, that's their first experience with the channel.
Right. Those iconic white cliffs, fading into the distance.
It's like a classic image.
It is. It really is.
Ferries, they're such a key part of how people and goods move between England and France.
Totally. I mean, you've got the Dover to Calais route, the most famous one, I guess.
Yeah, that's the one everyone knows.
But there are tons of others, too. Portsmouth to Cherbourg, New Haven and Dieppe, even routes to the Channel Islands.
It's like this whole network.
Yeah, a network connecting everything.
I've taken that Dover to Calais ferry a few times.
Oh, yeah.
There's something about it. Standing on the deck, feeling that wind, watching the coastline disappear.
I know what you mean.
It's like you're connecting with all those historical crossings we talked about.
Makes history come alive a bit, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah. And then, of course, there's that modern marvel, the one that totally changed how we think about crossing the channel.
The Channel.
The channel, exactly.
That thing's amazing.
1994, right, when it opened.
Yeah, such an engineering feat.
It felt like something out of science fiction.
50 kilometers, under the sea, connecting the UK and France by rail.
No more rough seas, ferry schedules, just hop on a train and zoom, you're there.
Makes things so much faster, more efficient.
It's mind-blowing to think about how they actually built that thing, a tunnel under the seabed.
Thousands of workers, incredible technology, a huge undertaking.
And now it's like this vital link. High-speed trains, freight, shuttles for cars and trucks, everything.
Yeah, it really changed the game.
All that happening under the water while ships are sailing above, it's kind of wild.
Two worlds right there.
It really is. But let's move on to something a little more, well, leisurely. Tourism.
Oh, yeah. The Channel's got a lot to offer there.
Centuries of people coming to these coastal towns.
On the English side, you've got those classic resorts, Brighton, Bournemouth.
Yeah, beaches, piers, the whole seaside experience.
And over in France, you've got those charming towns, Deauville, Saint-Malo, all steeped in history.
I love exploring those places, those little streets, imagining like sailors and fishermen walking those same paths centuries ago.
It connects you to that maritime past, doesn't it?
It really does. And it's not just the towns. The whole coastline is dotted with reminders of the past.
Yeah, old castles, World War II defenses, it's all right there.
It's a landscape that tells a story.
Absolutely.
And I'm also thinking about the future.
Oh, yeah.
The channel's role in, renewable energy.
Right. We're already seeing wind farms popping up out there.
Are we?
Yeah. Harnessing all of that wind power, creating clean energy.
That's amazing.
Like the Rampion Wind Farm off the Sussex coast. That's a big one.
I've heard of that one.
And they're planning more on both sides, England and France.
I'm all for renewable energy, anything to help us get off fossil fuels, but are there any downsides to these wind farms, like environmental concerns?
There are always challenges with big projects like this.
Right.
You have to consider the impact on marine life, what the turbines look like, how they change the landscape.
It's about finding that balance, right, between the benefits of clean energy and protecting the environment.
Exactly. It's not always easy.
What about tidal energy? With those crazy tides we talked about, could that be a source of power too?
Potentially, yeah.
Really?
It's still being developed, but those strong currents in the channel, they could generate a lot of energy.
Wow.
They're looking at different technologies, underwater turbines, tidal barrages, all sorts of things.
That's really cool. Using the power of the channel itself.
Nature providing solutions.
It's like the channel is constantly evolving, right? Adapting to what we need, but still holding on to its past.
That's a great way to put it.
But let's shift gears for a minute.
Okay.
Let's talk about something a little more, adventurous.
Adventurous.
The English Channel and its, daring crossings.
Oh, yeah. People have been pushing their limits out there for centuries.
Seriously, what drives people to swim across it?
It's that human spirit, wanting to conquer something that seems impossible.
I guess so.
Channel swimming, it's like the ultimate test of endurance.
Cold water, strong currents, that distance, it's crazy.
It's a mental game as much as anything.
And Captain Matthew Webb, the first recorded swim, 1875, over 21 hours in the water.
That's wild. I can barely swim a lap in the pool without getting tired.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But it's not just swimming. People have crossed the channel in all sorts of crazy ways.
Oh, yeah. We've had pedalos, kayaks, windsurfing, even a bathtub, believe it or not.
A bathtub. Seriously.
Seriously. Richard Branson even crossed it in an amphibious car back in '87.
People are nuts.
It's like the channel is this giant playground for adventurers.
Makes you want to grab a kayak and give it a go.
Maybe not a kayak, but it's inspiring, isn't it?
It is. All that history, that beauty, and this constant challenge. It's amazing.
It reminds us that even a place as familiar as the English Channel can still surprise us.
So true. We've journeyed through time, explored its depths, and I think it's time to take a step back and think about everything we've learned.
Sounds good.
What are your final thoughts on the English Channel?
It's amazing. We've covered so much ground, haven't we? The English Channel. It's so much more than just a body of water.
It really is, and I don't know, it's just this feeling of resilience.
Resilience,
Like
yeah.
it's seen empires, technology, human triumphs,
Yeah.
and yet there's still this sense of continuity.
I know what you mean. It's that kind of duality that makes the channel so interesting.
Yeah.
It's constantly changing, evolving, but it's also got these deep roots, this long history.
So thinking about all that, bridge and barrier, conflict, cooperation,
Mhm.
what role do you think it plays in the future, especially for Europe?
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, things are changing so fast. Climate change, politics, economics, you name it.
Right.
And the channel, it's right there in the thick of it all.
It's like a microcosm of the world, right?
In a way, yeah.
All these big issues, sustainability, security, even identity.
It's all connected.
What do you think are the biggest factors that will shape his future?
Well, climate change, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Rising sea levels, storms, changing weather patterns.
All that impacts coastal communities, shipping, even the ecosystem.
Exactly. It's all connected. It's all going to have to adapt.
It makes you think about those towns we talk about, those historic ports. How are they going to handle it all?
And then you've got, the whole Brexit thing, the UK and Europe trying to figure out their relationship.
Right. Will they cooperate more on things like renewable energy, the environment?
Or will the channel become more of a dividing line?
I guess only time will tell.
It's hard to predict, but one thing's for sure. The channel's not going anywhere. It's going to keep playing a big role.
Yeah.
Its history, its location, you can't ignore that.
It's almost overwhelming to think about all those forces at play shaping this waterway.
It is. It really is.
But that's what I love about, these deep dives. It opens your eyes to things.
You learn so much. You see things differently.
So to our listener, keep exploring, right?
Yeah.
Dig deeper into those historical events, look at the challenges, the solutions.
Yeah, get curious.
The English Channel, it's a story that's still being written, and we all have a part to play.
And who knows, maybe you'll be inspired to do your own crossing, whether it's swimming or just learning more.
The possibilities are endless.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us on this journey through the English Channel. It's been a blast.
My pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring.